Hey everybody! Today we have a really fun interview with George Sirois, who is going to talk about whether it is worth it to go back to early stories that you've written and revamp them. Okay, so it's something that you're probably going to need to think about at some point in your author career, and he's got some really great advice where that goes. But we will get to that interview in just a minute. Welcome to the Prolific Author Podcast. Let's face it, readers read fiction to feel emotion and be transported and transformed. In this ongoing digital revolution, where online marketing is always in flux, the only way to create a sustainable author business and live off your royalties is to write transformational stories, market at every stage of the author journey, and cultivate a loyal audience of readers. Fortunately, there's never been more opportunity to make a living as a fiction author. Hi, I'm Liesl Hill, USA Today bestselling author and story clarity coach. When I'm not dictating my own stories about dragons, serial killers, and dystopian worlds, I help other authors write their own transformational fiction, position them as bestsellers, and market them like pros. Join me on the podcast where I give writing tips, marketing how-tos, story advice, and interviews with other authors who are in the trenches just like you and making it work. We are prolific authors. First, let me ask you a question. Do you want clarity on your story, on your work in progress, otherwise known as a WIP? Do you want to know that you've included all the necessary elements to make it a bestseller? If so, you can book a Power Hour clarity call with me, and I will do an audit on your manuscript and make sure that you are where you need to be in terms of your plot, your story, your character, and your pacing. Okay, this is available to anyone who has never had coaching from me before, and I'm not going to be doing them for very much longer. Probably another month and a half, and then I'm going to move on to different projects and different types of coaching. So this is kind of a limited time offer, and if you are interested in that, go to bit.ly/Power Hour 97 and book that call with me. Okay, again, that's bit.ly/Power Hour 97 so that you can get absolute clarity on your manuscript and know exactly where you need to be and where you need to go. Okay. With that aside, let's move on to a bit of a personal update. I don't have a whole lot that's new. I am still working on Intricron. I'm still working on Dragon Magic. In fact, me and my critique group were talking the other night about sort of the woes of working on several projects and trying to jump between them. I think a lot of writers are guilty of this. I certainly am. And, in terms of productivity, it's pretty much been proven that you really shouldn't jump between projects because it really does sacrifice your productivity. So I really need to knock that off and be a little more streamlined, and I will get there. I really am getting there. I've got about 4 major projects that I'm trying to get finished up in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'm gonna sort of reassess and try to keep myself focused on one project at a time. So yeah, wish me luck with that. I'm really close on getting my email swipe files available for people who would like them. So I've been working on this for a long time, getting basically the blank templates for you that I use to nurture my email list and send to them every week. They're different than what other people use, but they're very, very effective. So I've been really working on this as a project for a while, and I'm hoping to finish it up on Friday or Saturday. So again, wish me luck with that. I'm really close to finishing it, and I'm really excited about that. Beyond that, let's see. We've had some fantastic windstorms here the last few days. Thankfully, the city I'm in, we really did not get the brunt of it. There was definitely some howling wind, but that was pretty much it. We didn't lose power or anything, but I have siblings and friends in adjoining cities where it was way worse. People's garbage cans were being knocked over, and so there's garbage rolling down the street in the wind. And I know that a few people had trees got knocked over in their yards, where it was the worst. So yeah, that's been kind of fun. And it's funny because I've heard a lot of people talk about this. Really, the winter is just hanging on this year. That's true here. Every time we think it's going to get warm, we end up having to, get our winter clothes back out and turn the heat back on and everything because it just gets cold again. Usually by now we're much warmer than we are, so we're sort of unseasonably cold right now. But I've heard people talking about that all over, not only just all over the States, but even in other countries in the UK and things like that. So yeah, kind of a strange year weather-wise, and it's just a winter hanging on sort of year, but hopefully we'll finally move past that into the spring in the next few weeks. Let's hope so. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into the interview. George Sirois is an international best-selling author of science fiction. He's done lots and lots of great things, and you can tell he's very knowledgeable about writing and about his journey and about what makes a great story. So let's hop in and hear what he has to say. Hope you enjoyed the interview.
All right. Today I want to welcome George Sirois, who is a fiction author. How are you doing, George?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for coming on. Why don't we start by just having you introduce yourself and who you are and what you write?
Excellent. Yeah. My name is George Sirois. I am originally from New York, but I'm currently based out of St. Louis, Missouri. And I am the author of a 5-part science fiction sports serial called From Parts Unknown, which is currently available as one big volume. And I have also written parts 1 and 2 of a young adult science fiction trilogy. Part 1 is called Excelsior. Part 2 is called Ever Upward. Part 2 in the Excelsior Journey. And my current NaNoWriMo project is the latest draft of Greater Glory, Part 3 in the Excelsior Journey. And that's going to wrap up the whole trilogy and get everything going toward the next wave of stories that I have already kind of in the queue.
Nice, nice. So, sorry, give me just a sec. I've got a jet flying over. When
Oh,
you
no
say
worries.
science fiction sports, what does that mean?
Well, it's based on modeled very much on the 1975 film Rollerball, which was a sports movie of its own kind that was set in a distant future. Mine is not as quite a distant of a future, and it's more of a sport that that more people can recognize and not have the whole rules broken down to the way that they were in Rollerball. So it is science fiction. It is what I call like a dystopia in progress because there's still plenty of the recognizable world that we know, but there's a whole lot that's going into it that's pushing it in the direction that will force everything to kind of go downhill.
Mm,
And it's all centered around this one sports organization, which is the last remaining sport in all of America.
okay, interesting,
Mhm.
interesting. And what got you interested in writing that?
That was actually on a specific day when I was a freshman in college in 1995. I had just finished watching an episode of Wrestling Challenge on Saturday morning, and I took a walk around the area of my dorm. So at that time I was dorming on 77th and Broadway in New York City. And I was on Amsterdam Avenue when all of a sudden like an idea popped into my head just saying like, wow, wouldn't it be really interesting if all of the larger than life characteristics of professional wrestling was put into a sport that actually that that has all of the actual competition as say like Ultimate Fighting Championship and boxing and other MMA style sports. So it's combining the pageantry of wrestling with the legitimacy of an actual sport.
Hmm. And how does the dystopian play into that?
Well, it became an idea of just like, well, if there was a sport such as that, what would it be like with the rest of the world? And so I started really kind of giving a lot of thought about how it would likely be 20, 30, like even 40 or so years out. And so that's what eventually led to believe that all the other sports would basically implode upon themselves. So it wouldn't be an instant thing. There would be like a slow burn and a slow rise for this particular promotion.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm interested in how that works because I actually write somewhat. It's a dystopian, and it's really more like with science fiction elements than an actual science fiction, but it's also futuristic. So that's
Yeah.
interesting that you're bringing sports into it.
Hmm.
I think that's super interesting. So
Yeah.
that's great. That's great. Tell us a little bit about your writer's journey. How did you get into writing? How did you come to be where you are now?
Well, it really kind of started back in 1985 when I was in 4th grade, and my friends and I would pass the time in between finishing up our assignments by putting together these characters that were very much based on all the different 80s shows and movies that we watched when we were growing up. So back then we had we had all the big ones. We had He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. We had Transformers. We had G.I. Joe. We had Voltron. We had all this
Yep.
great stuff. And then we had Star Wars on the big screen. And so it was a matter of kind of like taking those elements and basically just, you know, condensing them into something that we would be able to kind of put our own little world together and play with. And it got to be a lot of fun. And then the next year, when I was in 5th grade, I switched over to a different school, and I lost touch with a lot of my fellow students in over at the school that I had left. And so I basically kind of took those characters with me and just kept on refining them. And it got to a point where, even though like they were real, they were very primitive, you can say. I could tell there was something there. I didn't know what it was yet, but there was definitely something there. And so to kind of pass the time while I was working with them, I did what I've later come to realize was reverse fan fiction. Because with fan fiction, you're taking these established characters and you're dropping them into these new situations. What I did was I took my new characters and dropped them into very well established situations. I ripped off every single story that I had at my disposal, and it became fun to kind of like basically just pick and choose whatever worked for me and just drop it into this whole new surrounding. I was basically like Carlos Mencia before he became Carlos Mencia. And so it was a lot of fun, really, just, you know, kind of doing that, because I knew that there was nothing there was, even though I really liked these characters, I knew that at that time they weren't going to go anywhere past the Steno notebook. And so it was during that time when I started drawing them less and started writing them more. And that was pure necessity, because I can't draw very well. And so so I went ahead and just started filling notebooks with all this text. And again, ripping off everything in sight, but at the same time, it was creating like something. I was taking those moments, and yeah, it was as obvious as can be when it came to like what it was that I was going for. But then it was fun to kind of like revisit that and then start to tweak it so that it was less obvious, and then a little bit less obvious, and making it more my own. And that's when things really began to open up. And it really kicked off in 1992 when I was a sophomore in high school and had to take summer school for English. My English teacher and I did not vibe well, and we got to watch in summer school the 1981 John Boorman film Excalibur, all about King Arthur. And to me, it still stands as one of my all-time favorite movies, because it made me realize I need a new character in my little universe that I have going right now that is a reflection of King Arthur. He's going to be like this kind of this centerpiece of this whole universe. He's going to have a sword. He's going to be like a godlike form, like a god put in human form. And then I started thinking about not only taking elements from King Arthur, but also took elements from Jesus Christ and Optimus Prime, and wound up kind of mixing them up in a blender. And that became my character Excelsior. I always really responded to that word. Having been from New York and then moving to Richmond, Virginia, at that time, I really held on to that word. It's the word on the New York State flag. It's a prominent ship in Star Trek. It's what Stan Lee always used to end his soapboxes. And so it was a word that really gravitated toward me. And so I decided that would be his name. And from there on, I was really off and running with it.
Yeah. I don't think you could ask for a better way to get into writing, because it seems like you were just kind of doing constant, like, creative exercises, dropping your characters into the world. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Nice. And so now you're still turning those kind of childhood imaginations into a career and into a moneymaker for you.
Yeah, it's not a career yet, but it's definitely paying some bills.
Good.
And that's what we all want.
Right.
It's kind of like what Stephen King said. Like if you write something and you give it to someone, and that someone gives you money, and you put that money in the bank and then use it to pay your electric bill, I consider you talented. So
definitely
that to me is something that I've held on to for quite a while.
good.
Yep.
Yeah. So what exactly is your writing process? Like, what do you do to get your books written, and how long does it generally take you to get a book written?
That's a good question, because it's really like gone all over the place. Because
Yeah.
I'll really start off. The first one to really come out was From Parts Unknown, because with that one, it started off as a video game idea, a video game concept. And when I wrote that out, I thought, well, let's see how it is as a treatment for a movie. So I wrote that. Let's see how it is as a script. And then I wrote that. And then I wrote draft after draft after draft of that script, like over several years. One of the drafts actually made it into the New York International Independent Film and Video Festival.
Wow.
In the screenplay category, where they actually came up with an award, so that way they can give one to me, because it was so different from all the other types of scripts that were there. Because everyone else is thinking like all, indie and everything. I'm thinking blockbuster in my head. And so they gave me an award called Best Futuristic Drama, and I still have that frame to this day.
Nice.
So I was thinking over and over again, like what I was going to do with this. And then finally in March of 2001, I started novelizing it. But what I did was I started working on the novel to a point where the screenplay didn't really kick in until like page 50 or so. So it was a real good way for me to kind of flesh out that whole world that I was in. But at the time, like it took me about like a year and change or so to write that version, to write that novel. I finished it in July of 2002. And in 2002, the world of publishing is very different than what it is now. And when I sent my manuscript over to an acquaintance who was actually an agent at the time, he recommended that I self-publish, and not because of the quality of the work, although looking back on it, might have had something to do with it. But it was, but the idea was a very, very niche market. And that's something that I've really kind of come to terms with on that particular story. And so I came across the website iUniverse, and that's one of the many different printers that's out there right now, the different self-publishers.
Right.
And they were offering a deal where if you pay just $200, they'll take care of all of the setup that you need for your book, and will upgrade you to hardcover at no extra cost. So I said, score, let's go for it. And I had a friend of mine put together a decent looking cover, and it was released in November of 2002. All of my friends that were going to get their copy, my family members that were going to get their copy, they all got theirs, and then it died. And then nothing really came of it. And then in 2010, I reached out to iUniverse again, and I said to them, do you have any sort of deals going on? And they said, if you buy 25 copies of your book at 50% off, then we'll upgrade you to ebook. And at this point, the Kindle is really coming into play, and the Amazon is really starting to embrace that area, and things are starting to kind of, turn in that direction. So I was excited. I get to, this book gets to be an ebook. Great. And then I waited for a year, and nothing happened with the ebook. And so one of my one colleague that I knew at that time, because at that point Excelsior had come out, and that was also self-published, but it was done through a different company, and it had its own story attached to that. But I was speaking to someone who was working with Amazon, and she said, what other books do you have? And I said, well, I have From Parts Unknown. And she said, do you own it? I said, like, well, it's being printed by iUniverse. She said, get your rights back, and you can go ahead and release the ebook yourself. So I did that. I reached out to iUniverse. I said, can I get my rights back? And they had no problem giving it back to me because it wasn't selling.
Right.
And so once they sent it back, I went through one of those 25 copies that I still had at home, and I read through it. I realized I didn't like it anymore. I liked the concept, but the writing was definitely not. I could tell that that I had grown as a writer.
Right. You'd
since
become more
2002.
skilled. Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that, but the technology was all dead technology that I was working with in the story.
Oh,
So I took about 4 years or so and gutted that whole thing. Um, Perfect analogy. Did you ever see the remake of RoboCop?
yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
Okay, so remember the show me scene where the doctor actually like takes, reveals to Alex just how much damage has been done to him, and it
Yeah.
strips away like the entire body, so that all that's left is like the head and the right hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty much what I did. I basically I blew up that whole story, and there was only like a fraction of it left, and all the rest of it was rewritten, and it became this opus, this huge thing that it looked like it was going to be a brick. And so that's when I thought, like, well, instead of, this thing is going to be a niche market on its own, so why don't I break it up into much more palatable parts? So it became a 5-part miniseries. And that was so much fun to do, because then I get to decide, okay, the cliffhanger is here, and then it's here, and then it's here, and then it's there. And then and get to give about almost twice the amount of space to part 5 to really give it that sort of blow up opening, this really big climax that it deserved. And it
Yeah,
was
for
so
sure.
much fun getting to do that, like just getting to really explore so much more. And there was so much more politics that went into it, and so many different laws that went into it. And, really got to explore how the government is now using this league as a tool of distraction. And that's when all of a sudden it became something entirely different. And I loved it. I was so happy
Hmm.
with it.
So when did you finish that and start selling the new version of it?
Well, I thought it was finished in 2015. And then after looking back through it and everything, I thought, like, all right, well, let's go ahead and release it as 2 separate parts. So part 1 will have parts 1, 2, and 3, and book 2 will have parts 4 and 5. And so that was how it was going for a while. And then finally I just decided, you know what, let's give it one more gloss, one more rewrite, and then let's put it all together into one big book and sell it like that. And that's when I, teamed up with Ingram Spark, and I had some additional ISBNs that I'd gotten previously, and I just never used.
Hmm.
And then basically just went and did the whole route of setting it up on both Ingram Spark and KDP, so that way it would be available on Amazon. And it became something really, really big. And in September of 2019, not only did I get to successfully launch it, but since I had worked for a time at Barnes & Noble near me, I was able to use those connections and set up my launch there. And
Nice.
that was a lot of fun. That
Yeah.
was so much fun to be able to do that. And it was a real thrill to be able to finally say, okay, this story is done. I'm really happy with it, you know, and
Yeah.
let's see where else it can go, so it's out there right now. I went ahead and put it on Amazon for 99 cents for a while, as I considered it like very much like a lost leader in that sense, like
Hmm.
the ebook part of it, just because, um, this is, people are taking a chance on this. Like, it is a very niche market. It still is, but I'm really, really proud of how far it's gone. And I'm really looking forward to finishing up this one audiobook that I'm editing for a client, so I can dive in and start narrating that audiobook.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. So,
Mm-hmm.
I would like to talk a little bit more about how, you keep saying it's a niche audience, and that's true, but there's, with the Amazon and the way technology is rolling forward, there are so many more niche markets than there used to be that have a lot of readers in it.
That's true.
So, it really opens things up to people who write more niche type fiction. So can you talk a little bit about how, just the importance of doing the overhaul from something that you'd written earlier, and why that was important for you to do, and how you think that will, affect you going forward, and your sales and your readers and all that sort of thing?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because so far the 3 books that are out there have all existed in some other form in the past. With From Parts Unknown, like I said, like it's been a video game concept, then a treatment, then many scripts, and then like the 2002 novel, and now it's the 2019 opus that it is. Excelsior actually started off as a self-published book in 2010, and that was after writing the initial draft in 2008 as a Southern Cross Novel Challenge, which is the New Zealand version of NaNoWriMo. And working on that first draft for a month, and then working for almost 2 years on the rewrites with my editor. And then after that, after that initial launch, then I reached out to a small press publisher here in St. Louis who wanted it. And so I was able to give it another rewrite and then add in all the stuff that I regretted not putting in when the first edition came out. And then when that publishing house went under and I signed on with a different publisher, they said, do you mind if our editor goes through it? And that editor, who is just so happens to be one of my best friends, she took a sledgehammer to it. And so I spent several months rewriting that. So there are 3 different editions of the first Excelsior. And Ever Upward Part 2, that initial story it wasn't complete back in high school, but it was there. There was a definite skeleton of something there. And so I was able to kind of take that and then throw in all the meat and everything and really get it to where it's now, in my opinion, the best thing I've ever written. But at the same time, I also understand that it's because of that. It's because that's been my real experience with writing, is constantly rewriting stuff that I've done before. That's a big reason why Part 3, Greater Glory, has been so difficult to get through, because I never had a completed story for this one. All I had was just a handful of wouldn't this be cool moments. I never took the time to explore it before now. And so now it's like it's uncharted territory for me by doing this. So it's definitely a different procedure than what I'm used to.
Interesting. Yeah. And we had, not on this call, but we had talked before when we first connected about how important it is to you to stick to those original ideas that you started when you were a kid. And you had said that you're really stubbornly sticking to them. And why is it that you say that? Why the stubbornness?
I think it's just because I always knew that there was something there. If I could envision it somehow in my head, then it's something that I'm going to stick with. Excuse me. Sort of like, basically just like a stubbornness of, I've put all this into it. Why would I just throw it away? And there are other ideas that I had thrown away. But at the same time, they're thrown away, but never deleted. Like I still have a couple of scripts that I haven't done anything with in years, but they still exist. They're still on my hard drive. So it's really just kind of like, just like a stubbornness of, I know this can work because I can see it. My story editor told me a very nice thing when we really started ramping up with working together. She said that I have a very cinematic style of my writing. So like she can see how it unfolds on the big screen, which to me was just like, that's the best thing I could ever hear about my writing, because that's all I want. I want to see these stories on the big screen because it was the big screen that, for the most part, that inspired them. So that's what I really want to see. And what was a definite sign of maturity in my own eyes was a couple of years ago when I came to grips with the fact that the next series that's going to take place after Excelsior is still in the same universe, but it is the the absolute updated definitive version of all those characters that my friends and I created in 1985. So it's that whole storyline that I've been curating for so many years now, been decades. And I came to grips just a couple of years ago that if I push this as a young adult, which is what these characters are, I can't just say it's a young adult style, but it's science fiction because the characters are all adults. I can't mess around with the genre. I have to make sure that whatever genre I am writing it in, I got to stick with that. And so that's when I realized that this general type of character that I've been working with for so many decades is going to be a little girl, is going to be a teenage girl. And it was a sign of me just admitting that I can't keep banging my head against that particular wall. I got to do something different with this.
Yeah. I really like that. I think there's, you hear so often about writers who their first story, for most of us, our first books are not very well written because, the skills aren't quite there yet. And most people end up writing off those stories and a lot of times taking them down and that sort of thing. But I know with my first story, I kind of did what you did. I kept rewriting it and re-editing it because it was a story that I really believed in. And I knew that it wasn't where it needed to be, but I knew I needed to get it there. So, I mean, of course, it's a personal decision if you, don't want to go back and revamp your first book, but maybe there's something to be said for, the story that originally got you into writing and inspired you, and just going back to revamp that and make it better just because you believed in it once and other people can too.
Exactly. That's how I feel. It's just I'm not so it's not like I'm so conceited that the world needs to see my genius or anything like that. It's just that I just know that there's something there, and I may not know what it is right away, but it will be discovered. And there were times when I was writing Excelsior, that first book, that especially I keep going back to that second draft. The second draft is where things really took off because that was where I figured out how Excelsior was going to win at the end. And I also, spoiler alert, and I also knew that I needed a secondary character to secondary bad guy. And I had come up with this one character that I modeled after The Undertaker from WWE, that sort of imposing, menacing force with this long trench coat and everything. And when I pitched that idea to my editor, she immediately said, "Can it be a woman?" And I thought, you know what? Yeah. And then all of a sudden she became something that is become one of my favorite characters. And she was only born in 2010. She's only about 10 years old. She's got a long way to go to catch up to all the other characters. But I put her in my top 3 of favorite characters I've ever written.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
I love her. I absolutely love her.
Well, that's paramount. You got to love your characters or it's no fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And boy, does she make it fun. That's
Good. That's awesome. So, I mean, you said you're going to continue to write the YA books, but what are your other plans for the future?
Well, I am also exploring the possibility of shopping what I have already done around to see if there is anyone that is interested in actually optioning one of these stories to make the transition to the screen, whether it's big screen or small screen, whatever. Especially nowadays with with the theater industry being up in the air the way it is.
Right.
But I'm excited for the future because there have been just not concrete yeses going on, but there is definitely a little bit of percolating interest here and there. And it's just a matter of seeing where it goes. I can't say whether or not it is going to happen. I have faith that it will. But at the same time, I think that these characters deserve their chance to be seen. And I know every writer says that about themselves, about their own characters and everything, about their stories. But based on the journey that I've gone with all these characters, and that includes all the ones from Parts Unknown. I've been holding on to them for a reason, and they are going to let me know what that reason is in time. The only thing I can do is just keep on getting their stories out there and make sure that when the opportunity comes, I'm ready to take it.
Yeah, for sure. So what do you do to shop them around to see if there's interest?
Well, with From Parts Unknown, I went ahead and joined up there's this curating site called taleflick.com, TALE Flick. And it's basically a site where all these different stories, all these different properties are set up and displayed for potential producers to go ahead and take a look at them. And I went ahead and just made sure that my page was nicely upgraded so that way it would get studio notes, and it actually got a consider from the reader who went through it and gave some very positive feedback, and actually dropped in some ideas that I could potentially take, and run with once the time comes to turn that into a screenplay. Because originally I was thinking 5-part miniseries, but at the same time, I just want it to get out there. Whatever format it winds up being, so be it. I will do whatever I can to make that happen. And the fact that it was listed as a consider meant that it was a quote unquote tail flick pick, which means that when the producers go ahead and look for it, they obviously look for the upper quality stuff. They don't want to just constantly run through hundreds of pages of nothing. So they'll look for the higher quality books. And then there's top pick, and then there's tail flick pick. And mine is a tail flick pick. So that means that it's listed as, like the reader said, consider. So that would be something that I'm hoping the right person can look at and see that, that something is there.
Yeah, that's exciting for sure. Yeah. For sure. So you also have a podcast. Tell us about that.
I sure do. Yes. My podcast came about because I was looking through my list of Facebook friends, and I saw all these different people that I went to college with, all these different people I went to high school with, and they're in their own right. They're actors, they're actresses, they're designers, they're writers, they're filmmakers, they're directors, they're they're artists, they're singers, they're musicians, they are stand-up comics, they're dancers. It's an amazing group that I've been able to connect with in one way or another. And that's when I thought, all these really great, talented people, they deserve to be known. They deserve to be interviewed on a podcast or something, just to show the world that they're there. And then after a couple of months, I realized, okay, so they're going to come on my podcast and I get to introduce them. And so that's what really opened things up. And at that time, I was already part of a roundtable podcast with a friend of mine, with a bunch of other friends here in St. Louis, because we have a really thriving writing community here. And I talked to the director of our show, the producer, and I talked about what I wanted to do with the show. And I said, I just don't know what to call it. And he looked over my shoulder and he saw my banner for the first Excelsior book. And on the cover, it says Part 1 in the Excelsior Journey. And so he pointed to that and just goes, why don't you call it the Excelsior Journey? And I look back at it, I was just like, I'll do you one better. I'll lop off the and just call it Excelsior Journeys. So that way everyone has, and that's when things really picked up. And then all of a sudden I looked up Podbean to be the housing site for my show, and got a great setup and everything with what they cost, and everything was going really well with that. So I was really excited about the possibilities. And now I've just passed episode 60. And and even though it's got like a small audience, the ones that listen are are really enjoying it. And I'm hoping that at some point, just like with the other stuff, with the other screenplays, at some point the right person is going to listen to the right episode that's going to prompt them to listen to more. And so the only thing I can do is keep on producing more.
Sure.
And this year has just been just this wonderful fountain of great guests that I've had on there. I just had 7-time USA Today author Melissa Storm. The week before that, I talked to Halloween 6 screenwriter Daniel Farrens.
Nice.
A couple of months before that, I was talking to Tales from the Crypt producer Gilbert Adler. I was talking to voiceover actor Neil Ross. I was talking to Transformers the movie screenwriter Flint Dilley, which is to me, being a fan of Transformers as far back as 1984 when they first started, that was a huge bucket list moment for me.
Good.
It was just, like just the guests that I've had, it's been a real treat because I've been, like bringing in those guys, but also bringing in a lot of my friends. So I was able to kind of keep that going. So it becomes a weekly interview show, putting the spotlight on creative people that get to tell the story of their own journey to success.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think that's a great premise for a show. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
So thanks so much for talking with us today. Before we wrap up, what advice would you give to other creatives or other writers out there, especially ones who, might think that all they have is a story they made up with a kid and that's just not gonna, fly today or something like that?
Have patience. That is the big thing. Have patience. What you produce the first time around will not be what everyone sees. You have to basically just accept that fact. And once you have, then the sky's the limit, because then you're giving yourself permission to write crap for that first draft. And once you do that, then you have something to rewrite, because that's what writing is in general. And you have basically kind of like poured the foundation for this house that is going to be your novel. And too many people are trying to pick out the right color drapes when they should still be concentrating on pouring the concrete for the foundation.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I implore to everyone. Have patience. Do not rush this process. And don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of the process. Let it guide you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really love that. I always say, I think people need more. It is what you said, the foundation. People need more storycraft and more of the basics than they think they need.
Yeah.
They think because they once took a creative writing class that they don't need any more of that stuff. And most of the people who don't, and who do, the people who do the things you told them, not to do, the people who rush the process or are afraid of the process, they end up putting books up that just don't sell. So yeah, I think that's really, really sound advice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for being on with us and for giving us your advice and telling us about your journey. I think my audience is going to really take away some real gems from that.
I hope so. Like anything I can do to, to help out anyone, that is in the end, that's what we do, because when one of us succeeds, we all succeed.
Yes, very much so. We can help all raise each other.
Exactly.
Great. So where can people find you and your books?
Well, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Excelsior Books. You can also find my podcast there at facebook.com/Excelsior Journeys Podcasts. You can find me on Twitter at George Sirois, Sirois. It's all one word, no spacing or anything like that. You can find me on Twitter there. You can find me on Instagram there. And yeah, so it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Those are like the three main spots where you can find me. And you can also find the podcast itself, Excelsior Journeys. You can find that one on all different platforms. The main ones that I always talk about are Apple, Google, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Podbean, iHeartRadio, and as of a couple of months ago, Amazon. So you can actually go to your Echo Dot and say, Alexa, play the Excelsior Journeys podcast, and it will start playing.
Fun.
And which I really love. And you can also hear a mini series podcast that I did called From Duck Till Dark Outside the Marvel Studios, which is a mini series celebration of all the different Marvel movies that were outside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So all the ones from Howard the Duck going all the way to Dark Phoenix, the last X-Men movie.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a fun series.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it's something I definitely want to revisit in the future. Just, I got some other stuff I need to take care of first.
Right. There's always 10 projects on the docket, right?
Always.
What it's like to be a creative.
Yep, exactly.
All right, great. Well, I will make sure and link to all of those in the show notes. And thank you again so much for talking to us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
Me again. Before you go, if you found value in this episode, I would love it if you could leave me a review. Reviews are the best way to show your appreciation and help others find this podcast. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your favorite social media network, and tag me at LK Hill Books. Remember, the world needs your stories. Only you can change someone's heart with your fire-breathing dragons, your mind-blowing mysteries, your epic romances, and your intense thrillers. So join the revolution and be a prolific author.